want to move that, or you want to get rid of it?
Let's see. Yeah, that would be good. You can
Alright,
leave that
gives
there.
you something that gives us the name.
Mm-hmm. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit here
Okay.
because I don't want you thinking about the cameras.
Oh, I saw not to
So-
look in the cameras.
Yeah. So we're going to just, you know,
Okay.
just kind of think of
Let's
us as
have a-
talking.
All right, let's have a conversation.
All right. So, I'll start off by asking you, who was the first captain of the original Kalmar Nickel? And
All right.
when you answer, to remember, they're not going to hear my voice.
Right. They'll,
Yeah,
they'll,
so-
put it in. How about if, can we start,
You
can
wanna start
I
somewhere
start with
else?
something?
Sure.
Let's start with something bigger
Okay.
and broader, which would be something about the original Kalmar Nickel and why it mattered.
Sounds good.
So the original Kalmar Nickel is one of the most important colonial ships in American history, and it's Delaware's ship, and it's relatively underappreciated, unknown. Let me give you a few things as to why it was such an important colonial ship. First is it was Peter Minuit's flagship that brought the Swedes to Delaware and the Delaware Valley and launched the colony of New Sweden in 1638 right at the rocks next door. So that's number one. Number two is it brought the first permanent European settlers to Delaware, what became the state of Delaware, and the entire Delaware Valley, which makes the ship sort of the Mayflower of the Delaware Valley. It makes Fort Christina right next door the Jamestown of the Delaware Valley, which puts it into perspective, because the Delaware Valley, if you think about the first permanent European settlement in the entire valley, it's an enormous estuary that goes all the way up to the Falls of Trenton and down to Capes Henlopen and Cape May, both sides. Third interesting part of the story of the Kalmar Nickel is that it made 4 round-trip crossings of the Atlantic, more than any other documented ship of the colonial era. So it had a record of longevity and endurance that's unsurpassed, really unmatched in colonial history. 4 round-trip crossings, pretty extraordinary. So that's one of the reasons, I mean, those are some of the reasons that make the Kalmar Nickel, the original Kalmar Nickel, interesting to all of American history, but of course especially Delaware and Delaware Valley.
So, who was the first captain?
All right, we don't really know. It's interesting. Kalmar Nickel has a long and complex career. And they didn't keep very good records in the 17th century, and the records they kept often got lost, misplaced, destroyed, unfound. So we don't really know who the first captain was. The ship was built by the Dutch in 1625 in a major shipyard right in and about Amsterdam, 1625. We don't have good records or records of its career sailing for the Dutch. When it joins the records, the historical records, it's in 1629 when it's purchased by the Swedes, the Swedish Navy, through a mechanism called the Skeppskompaniet, which is just ship company, which was a sort of a corporation by the crown through which they could raise tax monies, tax local various cities and towns in Sweden to purchase ships to restock the Swedish Navy, which had had a number of disasters and catastrophes over the previous 4 or 5 years. They had lost something over 17 ships in their Navy. So they purchased 16 ships from the Dutch, one of which became the Kalmar Nickel. We don't know what its name was when it served for the Dutch. We don't know who the officers were or any of that. The first captain that we really know is on the first voyage to America in 1638. So that's the first good documentary evidence we have of a captain officer. And that guy was named Jan Hendriksen van der Water. He's a Dutchman. And this is a story that is central to the Kalmar Nickel story, which is how interrelated the Dutch and the Swedes were. They had a competing interest, but also a commercially collaborative interest, and a lot of Dutch served in Sweden, worked for the Swedes. The Dutch provided a lot of economic investment and incentive, and a lot of Dutch sailors worked for the Swedes. So that wasn't all that uncommon.
Do they know who the original designer was?
No, we don't know that either. And we did a lot of research when we were looking to reconstruct the ship. What we do know is that it was a Dutch pinnace. So the original ship was built by the Dutch. It was a fairly revolutionary new design called a Dutch pinnace, which is not to be confused with a later English pinnace, which was a very small ship used for harbor traffic. But a Dutch pinnace was sort of a, best way to describe it is a precursor to what we would call a frigate later on in the Age of Sail, a small frigate. It could operate as an armed merchant vessel, or it could operate as a small naval vessel, as an auxiliary naval vessel that would do scouting operations, mail delivery, other things that made it very appropriate and effective as a colonial ship when it was chosen in 1637 to become the ship that launched New Sweden.
Was the Kalmar nickel rebuilt from the original blueprints?
No, we don't have any original drawings. In the era of the early 17th century, so the original ship was built in Dutch shipyards in about 1625. Shipwrights and shipbuilders didn't record things, they didn't draw things. They weren't as literate a society, and it was kind of almost a state secret kind of thing, which you didn't want to put things on paper because somebody could take your ideas and use them. Most of it was rule of thumb and accumulated wisdom over ages, a lot of guild-like work, almost like a guild. And so they didn't actually have drawings. They didn't start doing naval drawings in most navies until the latter part of the 17th century. So we don't have drawings. What we do have is a lot of evidence, anecdotal, narrative evidence, and then pictures, paintings, and other references about what this Dutch pinnace designed. It was a class of vessels. So each one might have slight variations, but they were basically the same design. So we had a lot of evidence about what a typical Dutch pinnace would look like.
What was the original purpose for rebuilding the ship?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I was not here. I've only been here for the last 4 years, and I'm still a bit of a novice. It was a group of interested Delawareans who wanted to highlight Delaware's unique, interesting story and history and heritage, and one of the best ways to do that is through this iconic ship that brought the first Swedes and Finns, that brought the first settlers to Delaware. There was also an economic business component that businessmen got interested. It takes funding. The state got interested. To be, we were originally, when it was launched, we were designated a goodwill ambassador for Delaware, so that we could fly the flag and sail from port to port, as we have over the last 14 years, and really show off Delaware. It's a conversation piece. It's sort of a living history, so that was its original purpose. We have become an all-education organization. Sorry.
That's okay.
Should we?
Maybe wait a minute until.
What if I just? Because this will happen again. All right, let's try that.
Sorry about that.
So you want where? I don't know where you want me to pick
Because
it
that
up.
will pick up.
Yeah, definitely. Where would you like me to go back?
Let me see.
Oh, who we were. So
Yes.
originally we were sort of a goodwill ambassador. The other key component was under Governor Carper's leadership and former Governor Russ Peterson's leadership, there was a major effort to rehabilitate and revitalize the Christina riverfront. And if you go upriver, you know how nice it is with all the shops, retail, banks, vibrant sort of downtown riverfront, the Chase Center, the shipyard shops. And the Kalmar nickel was seen as a floating attraction, as a again an important piece to help galvanize interest to redevelop the riverfront. So there's an interest in that regard.
I think that actually pretty much covers everything that I had in mind. Is there anything?
Okay.
wanna
Did you
cover?
want to know more about what we do?
Yeah.
I could tell you, well, and I could give you a little bit more about the history of the Reconstruction. So a number of concerned citizens really got active about 1986, and they created the Kalmar Nickel Foundation to look into raising money, gathering enough momentum and support to reconstruct this original ship. Number of fits and starts and gathering momentum, and it wasn't until 1995 that we really hired a shipwright named Alan Rawl, the top naval architect from the Naval Academy, U.S. Naval Academy, Thomas Gilmers, actually did the design work for the ship. And as other experts have said, Thomas Gilmer taught naval architecture to the U.S. Navy, so we're probably in good hands. So it was, after a number of fits and starts, it was really, the keel was laid down in 1995. It took 2 full years to build, frame, build the thing, using mostly period techniques. I mean, shipbuilding, wooden shipbuilding,